Joe Marino of Locked On Bills, joined now by Cody Roark, the outstanding host of the Locked On Broncos podcast. He also covers the entire NFL for Pro Football Network, one of my favorite guys to talk ball with. And we got to talk about Von Miller, the newest Buffalo Bill, as odd as that may seem. And I want to kind of get into the weeds with Cody about the player that the Bills are getting, especially at this point in his career. But before we talk about the player that is Von Miller, I want to talk about the person in the locker room presence. What can you tell us about him? I've heard some awesome things about how he connects with his teammates. He met with the Buffalo media this past week, and you could just tell that's a big part of who he is. And I'm just anxious to hear anything you could add to the conversation.
Well, hey, Buffalo's getting a really good one here, Joe. And look, I've got nothing but great things to say about Von Miller, just as a player and also as a person, too. For one thing for him, I would say that what really changed his career around as a player and as a person was when DeMarcus Ware was introduced to the Broncos locker room back in 2014 when they made the free agency signing of him. He really came in and helped Von mature a little bit. I mean, before then, Von was having some, ups and downs in his career in terms of some off the field decisions. And that really helped Von kind of find a mentor. So now Von has applied everything he's learned from DeMarcus Ware, and he utilizes that with whatever locker room he's in. Now, one thing he always does too, he takes special teams players out to lunch. He's a defensive guy. He's a former Super Bowl MVP. You think a guy like that is just completely business 110% of the way, but he does whatever he can to get to know other players inside that locker room, whether you're a practice squad guy, whether you just play special teams. He's very close with getting to know everybody. He's a fun guy. He brings energy and juice to the locker room. And I think that's an exciting thing, especially when you look at the Bills defense too. And I think it's going to be really great for Greg Rousseau, by the way. I think that's going to be fantastic for him. I actually had a chance to talk with him at the Super Bowl. Very, very cool player. Bills fans should be excited. But Von, like I said, he's a glue guy now, and he's really all about creating legacy. One of the things he spoke to us, when his final moments in Denver was he really wants to create a legacy where he helps transform other teams, other cultures, and things like that in the locker room. I think it's going to be great for the Bills.
Sounds like he'll be a great fit because those are a lot of those things that you just talked about already exist within this locker room, and you add another guy like that and just elevates everything. And I think when you have an atmosphere where everybody genuinely cares about each other, you're playing for a whole lot more than a paycheck, right? And so I think that Von Miller is going to fit right in. Now, Von Miller, future first ballot Hall of Fame player. The production to this point in his career has been just unbelievable. So having watched him up close and personal since his entry to the NFL, what can you tell us about how he's aged? Because that's kind of the thing is we know what the 26, 27, 28, 29-year-old Von Miller was. Well, what's the 32, 33-year-old Von Miller? And the Bills, let's be honest, it's kind of a 3-year deal. It's a 6-year, $120 million deal. Oh, by the way, can you imagine if you told Von Miller that 7 years ago when he signed that 6-year, was it $118 million deal, that the contract he would sign at 32 has a bigger value? I mean, that's pretty crazy. But I think the question we all have is, how has he aged, and what can we realistically expect kind of in the later parts of his career here?
I don't think much has really changed with Von Miller. Now, in 2020, right before the season opener against Tennessee week 1 in practice, he just suffered a freak injury where he, ruptured a ligament inside his ankle. And so he had to get surgery and miss the 2020 season. He came back in 2021, Joe, and everyone was really optimistic. They're wondering what they're going to get from Von Miller. Well, let me tell you this. He wasted no time getting started in the first month there of the 2021 season. He won Defensive Player of the Month there. And then from that point forward, Bradley Chubb also got re-injured in week 2. So opposite of Von Miller, there was not a pass rush element. So you know what that means for Von Miller. That means that he's seeing extra attention. They're putting a tight end to his side. They're lining up if there's an offense that has a fullback. They have a tight end tackle and a fullback offset. And they're also using the running back at times to chip. He was fighting consistent double team and triple team pressures. And then he suffered the injury on Thursday Night Football against the Cleveland Browns, missed the next week against the Washington Commanders, and then was subsequently traded to the LA Rams in a great deal there. Joe, I think a lot of people will look at their the stat sheet, they'll look at box score and they'll say, oh, well, he had this many sacks this year. He had this many sacks. Sacks aren't the end-all, be-all. I like to look at quarterback hits. I like to look at pressures because, Joe, as you know this too, when you are causing pressure on a quarterback and you force him to either a quarterback to step outside of the pocket or contort their body in a certain way. If they rush a throw, it throws it into passing windows there where cornerbacks, safeties, they can find a way to pick the ball off. It forces turnovers. So the combination of pressure and sacks, it's still there for Von Miller. He plays with a high motor, and he's got an insane, and Joe, when I tell you insane, I mean it is a ridiculously insane offseason training regimen, obviously with OBJ's trainer, Jamal Liggin. They work together in LA all offseason long. He is going to be a force here in Buffalo, man. I'm excited. I think the Bills are going to get insane level of production from Von in this contract duration, whether it be 3 years, if after 3 years they want to look a little bit more. It's going to be scary. Look, the Bills became one of the scariest teams in the NFL. Forget the Devontae Adams trade. The Bills are the team that I'd be worried about, in the NFL here.
I was a little surprised when I went back and started researching Von Miller in ways that I never have, obviously, now that he's on the Buffalo Bills. This is a guy who plays a lot of snaps. I mean, 80% usually in every season. And that's quite the contrast compared to the way that the Bills have typically used their defensive line. They rotate a ton. I mean, guys kind of peak at 60, 65%. Von Miller's a guy that is literally on the field for almost every single snap. And when you talk about his regimen, I mean, that's how, right? He's able to keep himself in great shape. And one of the things about the Bills is from a facility perspective and training perspective and sports sciences and what they do to manage the workload of their veteran players, you just kind of feel like this is a very natural opportunity for Von Miller to step into and reach his objectives as a player in the right space that's going to allow him to maximize that opportunity to produce late into his career.
No, spot on there too. And you mentioned it as well. Like he's getting a unique position right now. I believe he has a chance. If the Bills can make it to the Super Bowl, and if the Bills can win a Super Bowl in his time in Buffalo, he'll be the second player in NFL history to win a Super Bowl with 3 different teams. And it's not just like, oh, he's been on 3 different teams. It says a lot about him. He's just playing the long game here at this point. It's crazy to think about when he was drafted initially in the 2011 NFL draft, coming in, obviously as the number 2 guy. Cam Newton goes number 1, his career in Denver, and then just his impact that he had on the Rams. I mean, granted, yes, okay, everyone's going to say, well, he had Aaron Donald, he had Leonard Floyd, he had a lot of pressure there. He was also creating a lot of that pressure himself. I don't know if anybody watched the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when they played in the NFC playoffs, but Von Miller was absolutely decimating the left tackle there. So it's like, people are, want to look at any way that they can minimize what Von Miller's doing, especially as he gets older. But I think he's getting better as time ages on here, Joe. I mean, he's got this determination to him. He's got a massive chip on his shoulder, and he's just got a personality, man. You guys are going to learn a little bit more about DJ Sauce Von the Don. He works on a DJ setup. He brings it to the locker room. He plays music in the locker room. He just gets everybody going, man. Like I said, I couldn't be more thrilled here for Von Miller. I couldn't be more thrilled for the Buffalo Bills fans, Bills Mafia. We already know the tailgates are crazy. It's going to be even better here with Von Miller.
So you've raved a lot over the first 8 minutes of this conversation about Von Miller, and I didn't expect you to say anything bad about the guy, and I'm not going to ask you to. But given all of this high praise, are you a little surprised that he didn't come back to Denver, especially because they proved with the signing of Randy Gregory that they had money they were willing to invest in an edge rusher? Are you surprised that he wasn't that priority to bring back?
I would say partly. Part of me was surprised. And I just think that was just like the nostalgia factor here, Joe, because, for George Paton saying, hey, we're going to trade Von to the LA Rams, we're going to get a 2nd and a 3rd round pick. It kind of meant that, hey, for George Paton coming in, this was the move that was going to be best for the organization to not only just acquire capital, in which obviously they've used some in the Russell Wilson trade, but also for them, it's like, okay, hey, we got to look forward to the future. And I think that for Von Miller coming in, look, there's so many different voices now on this Broncos defense. Like Justin Simmons has elevated as a captain on the defensive side of the ball. You bring back Von in, and all of a sudden it's like, these other guys, these young guys that maybe didn't get to play with Von necessarily, they have to listen to Von talk in the locker room and Justin Simmons. I don't think it would have been an issue, but I think that for George Paton, he wanted to go younger. And look, the Broncos have some, concerns themselves at edge rusher. The hope is that Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb can stay healthy. And if that's the case, the Broncos might have a very good duo on their hands, but still some questions at this point for them. So I think that's probably a big reason why the Broncos did not bring back Von. I know that they had some interest, but probably not at the price point that Von was looking for. And then Von even said in his press conference introductory in Buffalo was that he thought about Denver. Denver's one place. I can tell you this, Joe. Initially before free agency started, it was really between the Rams and the Broncos at first. And then Von kind of found out that the Broncos weren't as interested, and so it kind of shifted to, okay, hey, maybe the Dallas Cowboys, the Rams, and then we found out this mystery team kind of emerged last minute, and then it was Buffalo, and obviously they did enough to be able to swoop in and make it happen.
So, how do you project Von Miller to the Buffalo Bills from a scheme perspective? Because he's played a lot in a 3-4 type look, including with the Rams. And like we've already talked about, an 80% plus percentage of the snap guy. Now he's going to Buffalo, who has historically been an even front team. I mean, what are your thoughts on projecting him to this Sean McDermott defense?
Yeah, that's a tough question too, because for Vaughn, I think the last time he played really in that 4-3 defense was probably back in the 2013, 2014 season there, Joe. If you could, especially for Bills fans, they want to pull up NFL Game Pass, go back and watch some of the old film there. They had Jack Del Rio's 4-3 defense. And so we saw a lot of him still kind of playing that stand-up defensive end. So I think he'll probably be stand-up a little bit more. I'm not quite sure if obviously the defense will ask him to put his hand in the dirt. I know that he can, but I know his best suit is being in a staggered stance and being able to launch, because from that point there, he attacks the offensive tackle. If the offensive tackle steps, he does this thing where he can contort his body and just bend and get at a low level of gravity that we don't see from many players. So I think that'll be an interesting dynamic. How much does it change for Vaughn? I don't think it'll change much defensively, because obviously if he's playing on the edge there, especially as a defensive end, he's still going to be responsible for contain. And he's one of the best, I think, edge defenders as an edge rusher in the NFL. So I don't know, man. I'm excited. Like I said, I think everything's going to kind of play out here in the start of the 2022 season, but I still think it'll be a good fit, even though if it's a different scheme than what he's been used to the last 7 years.
Yeah, I think Von Miller's scheme transcendent player, right? I mean, maybe it's
Yes.
not the perfect thing because that's not where he's played, but if your defense can't find a way to get Von Miller going, then you have some bigger questions that you need to ask yourself. You're obviously well versed on Von Miller, and I remember studying him coming out in 2011 because there was a real chance that he would be a Buffalo Bill. And I remember in my research, I don't just watch tape; I try to learn more about the people that these players are. And this has definitely come to fruition throughout his career. Is that he's a very passionate chicken farmer, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is a big part of Von. I remember him saying that like he loves football, but he loves being a chicken farmer. So any other fun things? What can you tell us about that? Are there any misconceptions about Von Miller? Like what's the stuff that nobody talks about when it comes to Von?
Well, Vaughn, I would just say his personality, for him, he runs a personal vlog on his YouTube channel. He does a weekly vlog, which, I think for Bills fans wanting to get to know a little bit more about Vaughn, the person, and kind of what he does. And like, he's been very retrospective. And obviously, he just, in the last year, his son was born, Valor, and that was a big moment for him. So he opens up a lot about how becoming a father has really changed him, what he wants to do. He's a first-time father at this point. So for him, he's very excited about that. I mean, he's also he's into NFTs. He's big into the NFT world right here. I mentioned the DJ stuff. DJ Sauce Von the Don, that's his nickname. And I think Bills Mafia is going to love that. I could just imagine Von Miller before a game at a tailgate or like some event DJing for Bills Mafia while people are driving each other through flaming tables. That right there is poetry in motion. But then outside of that too, the chicken farm, like it did something like poultry science, in college, and he took it very serious. Like his own chicken farm, raises eggs and everything like that. Like his family is also very close. Like he's very close with his brothers, with his dad. He's a family man through and through. And like I said, he's a great personality. He's a very humble guy, and at this point too, he's really focused on helping build a culture, and not only that, but helping transform and mentor other young players. And when I look at this Bills roster, like I said, I think it'll be a great thing for some of these young guys.
Yeah, chicken stuff's pretty cool. Like his process for raising the chickens and like it's different, man. It's pretty interesting, and I didn't know about the vlog, and so I'm happy that you shared that because now I'm going to waste probably a weekend watching.
It.
Man, that sounds really fascinating. And it's funny because he mentioned in his presser that he had his videographer with him.
Yep.
And I'm like, all right, well, I don't know what that means, but now I do, and I'm certainly looking forward to the upcoming Von Miller vlogs. Hey Von, if you're watching, come on, let's talk. Let's promote the vlog here on Locked On Bills if you're willing. Let's close with this, Cody. Let's move away from Von Miller and let's talk about the Denver Broncos. My goodness, Russell Wilson, he changes that football team. I feel like for multiple years I was saying that the Denver Broncos are a quarterback away, and they just didn't have the guy to maximize that young talent that they have on on offense and the skill positions. I love the physical offensive line. I love Javonte Williams and just that identity of being able to run the football in Denver. And you've seen it, man. It's the fourth quarter. The Denver Broncos have the lead. They run the football. The other defense can't breathe.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Khalil Mack. It was the Chicago game against Denver a few years ago. Khalil Mack couldn't even get into his stance. He was so gassed late in that game. And Denver's just pounded it. So when you're Denver and you have an explosive passing game, which you certainly have now with Russell Wilson and those receivers, you have a physical running attack and certainly a defense that, what were they, number 2 in the league last year? I mean, This has got to be some exciting stuff going on here in Denver. So your quick thoughts here on Denver, the AFC landscape. What boxes do they need to check the rest of this offseason? And I mean, this AFC West is just nuts, man.
I mean, it's an arms race right now in the AFC West. And look, Russell Wilson really amplifies it. I wanted to make a point too. The way that we've seen the AFC West change, it's all because of one guy, Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
Everybody's been trying to chase after the Chiefs, and I know the Broncos certainly have. They tried to that's really why they have the defense that they do. They're like, hey, if we're going to play against Patrick Mahomes, we have to be able to stop him. We have to be able to cover the wide receivers that they have. So that's one thing that they've definitely been doing. And then outside of that, you also factor in now every other team in the division is doing the same exact thing. Russell Wilson immediately comes in. He brings his championship-like pedigree. I mean, is the way that he talks about things. One thing he said in his press conference, he said, I've already been able to watch all 17 games last season. I watched all the preseason games from Denver in the last week or so in preparation to come in here. I mean, he was naming off specific plays from specific games, and he was talking about certain things that certain players do really well. And that right there is that, hey, this is a guy that elevates it. And look, they haven't had a guy like this since Peyton Manning. And guess what? Ironically enough, Russell Wilson's introductory press conference was just about 10 years in the making from when Peyton Manning was introduced as a Denver Bronco quarterback. So it all kind of comes full circle. But Joe, you also mentioned it too in the AFC. It is an arms race, not just in the AFC West, but the Buffalo Bills are loading up. You take a look at the other teams there. It's the Bengals. They're adding offensive line help here for Joe Burrow. So man, it's going to be wide open. It's going to be very top heavy, and it's going to be very dangerous, I think, for the rest of the NFL. I think right now the Super Bowl favorite has to be somebody from the AFC in terms of going into next season. So I'm excited for it. It's going to be a bloodbath, Joe.
And it's funny you talk about Patrick Mahomes and how he's shifted the AFC West and what teams are doing to compete, right? I mean, Chiefs have won the last 6 AFC West championships, and I think the rest of the division's pretty fed up. Well, the AFC East had this guy called Tom Brady. He was there for a long time. And let me tell you what, Cody, the Bills, Dolphins, and Jets never did anything like this, right? It was pretty much you just took it for 20 years.
Yeah.
You tried, you kept switching GMs, you kept switching coaches and quarterbacks, but never did they have this type of competition that Patrick Mahomes is facing in the AFC West. It's going to be a crazy ride, man. It's going to be fun. Only one team's coming out of the AFC to play in the Super Bowl, so it should be a fun ride. This was a fun conversation. Everybody, make sure that you're following Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL on Twitter, the Locked On Broncos podcast, and, of course, all the great work that he does for Pro Football Network. Cody, this has been a blast. Thanks for giving us some of your time.
I appreciate you, Joe, and Bills Mafia. Always one of my favorite fan bases to talk with. And look, hey, if I ever make it out to Buffalo, I volunteer to be put through a flaming table. So there we go.
All right. You heard it right from Cody. Thanks for everyone for listening.